Hello, it's Rev Pepster here, and I've just been watching a video which I wish to respond to called Is Your Bible a Fairy Tale Book? Raising Hell equals End Times Deception and Satan's Modern Bibles. Yes, and I'm not the only one to be protesting about this right now. The gentleman, HeavenClear, makes a case, basically a King James Onlyism case, and accusing modern Bibles of removing hell. The title here says "Erasing Hell" from the Bible, but he actually, in his manuscripts, which he talks about, the original manuscripts, he says modern Bibles insert fairy tale markers. Which is a new one on me. A fairy tale marker is a new one to me. Now, he has a couple. There's a couple of real errors that get to me on this one. Firstly, he quotes the story, and his evidence is one section of the Bible, Luke's Gospel, chapter 16, verses 19 onwards, and it's the telling the story of the rich man and the poor man Lazarus. Now, basically, to paraphrase the story, there were two blokes, a rich man and a poor man. The poor man is named as Lazarus. He has a very hard life. The rich man has a very good life. They both die. The rich man goes to a place of torment, and the Lazarus goes to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man sees them. They can see each other. Sees Abraham and Lazarus, and calls for help. And basically Abraham turns around and says, "No, it's not happening. There's just too much between us, and I'm not going to go and tell your brothers either, because they've had the prophets just as you have. And besides, even if someone were to rise from the dead, would they believe anyway?" I wonder who could he be referring to there, or people's belief on someone rising from the dead. Anyway, this story Jesus tells, firstly, it isn't a parable. It isn't a parable. A parable is a story which runs parallel to a truth. Parallel, hence the term parable. Parable goes parallel to emphasize a point, a theory, a truth which is connected to the matter. Jesus here isn't talking a parable. One of the things that makes it different from a parable is there is a real person here. According to the Jews at the time, they would have accepted Abraham as a real person, and he appears in this story of the rich man and Lazarus, and he of course speaks in this story. So it cannot be a parable. If you accept it on faith, it is Jesus relaying a true event to these people. Secondly, for this man, HeavenClear's argument on erasing the reality of hell from the Bible. Okay, this is what the King James Onlyists do. They take somewhere one variant, which is different from the King James, and they build a whole theology and theory based upon this one variant. And here it is, what he's given here is this word "once" in the translation. Firstly, what he's done, he's made the King James Bible the standard by which he judges everything by. Okay? In King James Onlyism, the King James Bible itself becomes the standard. Doesn't matter what's come before, the evidence before, it doesn't matter about the evidence afterwards. They say, no, this is the mark we go by. This is what we go by, and we're not going by anything else. Okay? And basically, because the King James Bible is a translation, there's actually nothing to hold it up. The only thing that makes the King James translation credible is the Greek text it was based upon in the first place, in Hebrew text. Okay? That's the only thing that makes it credible. Okay? Of course, what they've done is they've stripped away that foundation. They've made the King James Bible the standard which they judge by. unfortunately they've undermined and stripped away the foundations, which gives the King James its firm footing, which makes it actually one of the best translations around nowadays, but it's still a translation nonetheless. Then he uses these fairy tale markers. Okay, King James Onlyism actually, I found it, the more I look into it, it's more and more insulting. It basically says that Christians cannot think for themselves. They have to do what the King James Onlyists say they have to do. They have to believe and they have to understand. King James Onlyists do not like footnotes with alternative readings in the Bible. They say it shouldn't be in there because it confuses people. Okay? I, as a scholar, say yes, these variant readings should be in there. It should say that other manuscripts have this word or include this word. Other translations include this phrase or delete this phrase. Okay? Because then the truth is out there for all to see. We've got nothing to hide. King James Onlyists want to hide things to support their position. To support their position. He enters here, and this is what I have against what this HeavenClear guy said. What he talks about fairy tale markers. Now, as an English linguist myself, student of English, and someone who pays close attention to these things, okay, I don't have to look at. Let's forget what my degree is teaching me. Okay, let's forget my university training. I'm gonna take you back to my school days. I remember at St John's in Chatham, where I used to go to school. My teacher, Mrs Pike, telling me that good fairy tales start with the phrase "once upon a time." Okay, and this guy HeavenClear has said the same thing. And yes, it's true. A lot of fairy tales start with the phrase "once upon a time," and throughout literature in English, if you see that phrase "once upon a time," you know it's a fairy tale. It's not actually real. Okay, it's not actually real saying. But then what this guy goes by, he does what King James Onlyism does. He takes a word and he builds a theory and a theology upon that word. He says, I can condense it all down to one word. Once. Okay, now unfortunately, once doesn't mean once upon a time. It doesn't have the same meanings. Unless, of course, you want to read into it that way. But you can't apply that to every time the word once is spoken. Okay? I want to tell you something. I once saw a video called Is Your Bible a Fairy Tale Book? Erasing Hell, End Times Deceptions and Satan's Modern Bibles. Fairy tale. Must be a fairy tale. I've used the word once. Okay, let's apply this theory to something else, shall we? Once there was a king in England called Harold, and once there was a Duke of Normandy called William, and they fought over the throne of England and its crown at the Battle of Hastings. Now, does that make the Norman invasion of 1066 a fairy tale? Yes, it does, because I use the term once. Okay, the term once refers to a period of time, a moment or a period of time in history of something that has passed. Okay? Jesus here is telling the story. Okay? On faith, I accept it as a true story. But it's past. And he says, once there was a man. Now this man obviously lived for a long period of time. This rich man lived for a long period of time, several years. And Lazarus lived for several years. But it's past. If linguistic terms, if you're going to add the word once into a translation, which grammatically is past tense, okay, because it was a period of time that has gone, and actually the story up until the time of Christ was ongoing, because of course until Jesus took the Old Testament saints into heaven, after his death and resurrection, they would have still remained in Hades. Okay, grammatically, it's correct to use the term once, but there's nothing in that to say that it's a fairy tale. They're trying to say this story didn't happen, or it's make-believe. There's nothing linguistically in there to say that. Unfortunately, what this guy has done is basically, like all King James Onlyism, put it on a series of fallacies, and now I say, in some cases, heresies. And then, because they've set the King James Bible as a standard, that's what they're judging things by. Okay? Even to the detriment of the English language itself. One of the Bibles that the King James Onlyists attack most of all is this one, the New American Standard Bible. It agrees with the translation of the King James Bible. It doesn't use the word once in Luke 16. It doesn't use it in there. Okay? But they'll attack it for all the other reasons they will do, but agrees with the King James translation. But does that mean to say that now there is evidence for the Nasba to be equal to the King James in the eyes of the King James Onlyists? Of course they'd say no. They'd quote something else. But this goes to show the errors of this thing that is called King James Onlyism. And because it sets the King James Bible as the standard which they judge things by. And I think this guy is in error in saying that, because just because they find amongst the hundreds of manuscripts that they have, in some cases thousands of manuscripts that they have of the New Testament, that there is consistent evidence to say to change the word from Lord to He in one verse, when you still, the context of the verse shows it's still talking about Jesus Christ, it doesn't mean it's denying the divinity of Christ. Okay, it's just that in the translation process, with the manuscripts they had at the time of the Textus Receptus, there was it came from a different field. It came from a different area of the world. Okay, but with King James Onlyism, that doesn't matter. What matters is the King James Bible says this, and all Christians must believe it and must read that only, or else they're not proper Christians. And that's one of the errors. And they use, to justify that position, arguments like this. Once. To say that once means something completely different, when once doesn't. It refers to something that has happened at a point of time or over a period of time, but is past history. Okay? So, I'm sorry, I'm sure he's sincere, I'm sure he's a lovely Christian, but he's following King James Onlyism, which is in error and has been consistently refuted as being an error from its positions. The next thing you know, he'll be making the video saying that all the peoples of the world, if they're going to be Christian, they must learn King James English. Otherwise they're not proper Christians. Okay, thanks very much, and happy studies.